She was standing under the wing of an F-22 Raptor when the sun came up. Not working, not inspecting, just standing there, one hand pressed flat against the aircraft's fuselage, fingers spread wide across the cold gray skin of the machine. The way you press your palm against a wall to feel if there's heat on the other side. The rest of the base was beginning to wake around her. A fuel truck rumbled somewhere across the tarmac. Ground crew moved in the distance, their orange vests catching the first light. The Texas sky above was that particular shade of pale gold. It only holds for about 12 minutes each morning before the heat takes over and bleaches everything white. Nobody paid her any attention. She was easy to overlook. That was something she had worked at carefully for 5 years. The olive green jumpsuit with no unit patch, no rank insignia, nothing on the chest to indicate who she was or what she had done. Brown hair pulled back, no jewelry, no sunglasses that cost more than $30. She had methodically removed every detail that might cause someone to look twice. It had worked. She was invisible here, and invisibility, she had decided, was the only kind of peace still available to her. Her name was Sarah Voss. She was 34 years old. She taught simulator training to first-year aviation cadets at a United States Air Force base in the high desert of West Texas, a place so flat and so remote that on clear nights you could see weather systems forming 2 states away. She was good at her job, patient, precise. She never raised her voice. She never talked about herself. She was by every measure available to the people who worked alongside her each day, completely unremarkable. She pressed her hand harder against the fuselage. The metal was cold. It was always cold at this hour, even in summer, even in Texas. By noon, the tarmac would shimmer, and the aircraft skins would be hot enough to raise blisters. But right now at 6:13 in the morning, the Raptor was cool and still, and Sarah stood with her palm against its side and felt something she could not name move through her chest like a current. She stood there for almost 3 full minutes. Then she took her hand away, turned and walked back toward the simulator building without looking back. She pressed 2 fingers against the outside of her left chest pocket as she walked. A quick check. The weight was there. It was always there. She left it alone. The mug she kept at her station was white ceramic chipped at the rim, and she filled it from the communal pot before anyone else arrived in the morning. Black coffee, no sugar. She drank it standing at the window of the simulator control room, looking out at the flight line, watching the aircraft sit in their stillness, while the world assembled itself around them. This was her ritual. This was how she began every day for the past 3 years at this base. Before that, 2 years at a base in Nevada. Before that, a year of not much at all in a rented room in Albuquerque, where she had slept badly and run long distances in the desert and tried to learn how to be a person who did not think about the sky every waking hour. It had not entirely worked. She finished her coffee and turned toward the simulator pods. The 3 cadets who filed in at 700 were the usual mix. 2 of them moved with that particular walk young pilots develop in the first months of training, a careful simulation of confidence. The shoulders back, the chin, elevated, all of it slightly too deliberate to be real. The third one, Cadet Owen Rafferty, moved differently. He was quieter than the others. He watched things. He had a habit of arriving 2 minutes early and sitting in his assigned pod without fidgeting, which Sarah had noticed in the first week and filed away without comment. She noticed things. She always had. Today's exercise was a standard one. Air-to-air intercept, single adversary, medium altitude. The kind of scenario that separated cadets who had read the manuals from cadets who had begun to develop instinct. Most first years at this stage were still in the reading the manual phase, and that was fine. That was expected. You could not rush the development of instinct. It either came or it did not. Sarah moved behind the monitor bank and watched their telemetry feeds. The 2 cadets who walked like pilots were already behind their throttle. Management was reactive rather than anticipatory, and they were chasing the adversary instead of predicting it. Standard errors, correctable. She keyed the headset connecting her to Rafferty's pod. "Your angle of attack on the intercept is 2 degrees shallow," she said. "You're planning to arrive where the target is right now, not where it will be." A pause, then quietly adjusting. She watched his telemetry shift, not perfect, but right in its thinking. He had understood immediately. Most cadets took 3 repetitions. She moved to the next pod. She talked one of the other cadets through his throttle management, patient and methodical, her voice level and consistent. She did not tell him he was doing poorly. She told him what adjustment to make and watched to see if he made it. From the corner of her eyes, she could see Rafferty watching her. Not obviously, the way someone watches when they are trying not to be noticed doing it. She did not acknowledge it. The morning session ended at 09:30. The cadets logged their debrief notes, and two of them filed out discussing their errors with the slightly wounded energy of young men, learning that being good at something requires years of being bad at it first. Rafferty lingered. He was closing out his pod interface with the unhurried focus he applied to everything. Sarah was resetting the master scenario board when he spoke. "You've done that intercept yourself," he said. It was not a question. She kept her eyes on the board. "Every instructor here has run the intercepts." "On a simulator," he said. "I mean in the actual aircraft." She waited a beat. "Finish your debrief notes, Rafferty." He nodded once and left. She stood alone in the control room, the equipment humming softly around her, and looked out the window at the flight line, at the Raptors sitting motionless in the heat that was already building. She took the dog tag from her chest pocket. Military issue. Standard stainless steel. The chain was gone. She had removed it years ago. The tag itself she kept loose so that when she reached in, she could feel its edges against her fingertips. The engraving was simple. Name, service, number, blood type. The way they all were. D. Mercer. She looked at it for a moment in the flat light of the control room. Then she put it back. At the far end of the building in an office that looked out over the administrative lot, rather than the flight line, Major Gil Tanner kept a workspace notable mostly for its disorder. Files stacked in arrangements that appeared random, but which he could navigate with complete precision. A coffee maker that ran all day. Photographs on the wall, but not the kind most officers displayed. No formal portraits, no grip and grin ceremonies with generals. His photographs were of aircraft, specific aircraft, an F-16 over desert terrain, a grainy image of an F-117 on a night flight. One photograph, smaller than the others, tucked into the corner of the frame of a larger image showing the silhouette of an F-22 against a West Texas sunrise. On his desk, half buried under a maintenance routing file, was a scheduling memo he had received 6 weeks ago. An audit notification. Records review classified programs 2017 through 2021 beginning the following Monday morning. He had read it 3 times. He had not responded to it. He had been waiting to see if anyone else would. No one had. Gil Tanner was 58 years old. He had spent 31 years in the Air Force in various capacities. Most of them administrative in their official description, none of them administrative in their actual nature. He was the kind of officer that organizations like this one produced occasionally, and then quietly relied on for decades, a man whose value was not in what his rank indicated, but in what he knew and who trusted him. He had known about Sarah Voss for 2 years before she arrived at this base. He had not, in 3 years of working alongside her, given any indication of this. This was not deception exactly. It was patience. Gil Tanner understood that some things had to be allowed to arrive at their own time. You could not force a person back to something they had walked away from. The walking away was part of it, maybe the most important part. You had to let it sit until it was ready to move again. He watched her from a distance, carefully. Not the way someone watches a person they are suspicious of. The way someone watches a person they feel responsible for without the person knowing. This morning she had stood with her hand on the Raptor's fuselage for almost 3 minutes. He had been watching from the far end of the tarmac, coffee in hand, and he had felt something shift in his chest. Not surprise. He had been waiting for this in some form for a long time. He picked up the audit memo from his desk, looked at it once more and set it back down. He went to the window and looked at the flight line. And he waited. The afternoon session was advanced aerobatic theory. Sarah ran it from the front of the classroom, no simulator pods, just the whiteboard, and the mathematical framework of what happens to an aircraft when a pilot asks it to do things that physics would prefer it did not. She taught the way she did everything, without excess, without performance. She drew vectors on the board and explained the forces, and when cadets asked questions, she answered them directly and without condescension, and when they said something incorrect, she did not tell them they were wrong. She showed them the correct version and let them arrive at the gap themselves. Rafferty asked the most questions. They were always specific questions, never the kind intended to demonstrate knowledge, the genuine kind. The questions of someone who needed to actually understand. Toward the end of the session, he asked about energy management in high G sustained turns. It was a question that went slightly beyond the curriculum for his level. Sarah paused at the board. "You bleed energy in a hard sustained turn," she said. "The aircraft does not care how good you are. Physics takes from everyone equally. The question is whether you bleed it deliberately or whether it happens to you." She drew a quick diagram. A pilot who lets it happen to them is reactive. A pilot who bleeds it deliberately is buying something. The question you have to learn to ask yourself every time is, what am I buying with this energy, and is it worth the price? Rafferty wrote it down. The other cadets wrote it down. But Rafferty was the only one who looked up afterward and seemed to be thinking about something larger than the immediate answer. She closed the session and erased the board. She ate alone at midday. Not because she was unfriendly exactly. The silence was necessary. It was something she had learned about herself after years of being in environments that never went quiet. You had to find your quiet somewhere. If it did not exist in the place, you had to create it inside yourself and protect it. She was halfway through a meal she was not particularly tasting when her attention caught on something across the room. Gil Tanner, sitting with two other officers, was not looking at her. He was talking animated in the way he became when a subject interested him. But in the brief moment when he turned to acknowledge something one of the others said, his eyes moved across the room in an automatic scan. They stopped on her, just for a moment, then moved on. Sarah looked down at her tray. She had noticed Tanner noticing her before. There was nothing threatening in it. He was old enough, experienced enough, and careful enough to be something other than simple curiosity. She had decided early on not to pursue the question of what it was. She finished her meal and left. The alarm sounded at 16:47. She was in the simulator control room running a data review alone when the first klaxon hit, not the general alert tone that preceded scheduled exercises. The other one, the one that once you had heard it in a real situation, you never forgot the particular quality of its sound. She stood up from the chair before she had consciously decided to move. Through the window, she could see the flight line erupting, ground crews moving at sprint pace, the base intercom cutting through the klaxon, a voice flat with controlled urgency. Unidentified aircraft approaching restricted airspace. All active duty flight personnel report to designated stations immediately. This is not a drill. She was already moving to the door. The command center was 3 buildings over. She moved quickly. Around her, the base was transforming from its afternoon routine into something else entirely. Personnel flowing toward their designated crisis stations, vehicles moving, radios coming alive everywhere at once. She should not have been going to the command center. Her designated station in any base emergency was the simulator building. She was a civilian contractor, technically, which meant her crisis role was to secure equipment and wait. She knew this. She was not doing it. She pushed through the command center door. The room was already loud with purpose. 8 officers and technicians working consoles, the large display screens on the wall, showing radar feeds, flight maps, and a blinking contact marker, moving steadily across the western Texas desert airspace. Colonel Ray Hartwell stood in the center of the room with the physical stillness of a man controlling his own urgency through deliberate effort. He was 52 years old, silver-haired, the kind of face that belonged to someone who had made difficult decisions long enough that they had stopped looking difficult. He was looking at the radar display, and the muscles in his jaw were working. "What's the contact?" he said. Airman Wyatt Fossey, 26 years old, 8 months at this base, answered without looking up. "Unidentified UAV, sir. Speed consistent with military-grade propulsion. Profile does not match anything in the registry. It is moving toward the corridor above the 385. The 385 was a highway that ran through 3 towns. "Get the Raptors up," Hartwell said. "Where's Dawson?" A pause that lasted 1 second too long. Lieutenant Commander Briggs answered carefully. "Sir Dawson collapsed in the briefing room 20 minutes ago. Possible seizure. He is with the medical team." Patterson. "Falcon 2 is grounded, sir. Engine fault found in pre-flight. 2 hours minimum to clear." The room was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with its noise level. "Who else is rated for the Raptor on base right now?" Hartwell said. Nobody answered immediately. It was at this point that Gil Tanner, who had been standing at the back of the room with his arms crossed, spoke. His voice was unhurried. "Sir, I need you to look at something." Hartwell turned. Tanner held a tablet. He walked it forward without further explanation. Hartwell looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked up, and his eyes moved to the back of the room where a woman in an unmarked olive jumpsuit was standing quietly near the door. Hartwell said. His tone was not dismissive. It was the tone of a man confronting something that does not fit in the category he had placed it in. Tanner said, "In 2019, she flew alone into controlled airspace in Afghanistan to extract 3 downed pilots. No authorization, no support. She went in, she brought them out, and she got everyone home." He paused. "The mission never appeared in any official report, for reasons that will make sense in a moment." Hartwell looked at the woman at the back of the room again. "Her call sign," Tanner said quietly, "is Ghost 6. The room did not stop its work. The technicians kept their eyes on their screens, kept their hands on their keyboards. But something changed in the quality of the air. The change that happens when a name means something to people who thought they were the only ones who knew it. Sarah Voss was looking at the radar display. Her expression had not changed. She was looking at the blinking contact marker, the way you look at something you have seen before in a slightly different form, but recognize completely. That contact, she said from the back of the room. Her voice was quiet enough that you had to stop talking to hear it. The room stopped talking. She walked forward until she could read the radar data clearly. What vector did it use to enter the corridor? Fossey answered. Northeast approach bearing 227 altitude transition at show me the full approach trace from point of entry, she said. Fossey pulled it up on the main screen, a line traced backward from the contact's current position, showing its path through restricted airspace over the past 18 minutes. Sarah looked at it. Gil Tanner standing beside her looked at it. He had seen this approach vector before. Not on a screen, in a briefing document classified 7 years ago. It was the insertion approach that Ghost 6's Black Operations Unit had developed for low detection entry into secured airspace, a proprietary tactical signature, developed by a team that had been officially dissolved, officially erased. He looked at Sarah. She was still looking at the screen. Her face was unreadable. But her right hand had moved it almost imperceptibly to her chest pocket. That is not a random approach, she said quietly. She was saying it to herself, to the version of herself that was still trying to find an alternative explanation. Someone designed this. Ms. Voss, Hartwell's voice was controlled. This contact has 9 minutes before it reaches the 385 corridor. I do not have a pilot. 8 minutes, Fossey said. He said it the way someone says something they wish they did not have to say. Hartwell said, I need an answer. He turned to Briggs. Get J.A. on the line. I need a temporary active duty authorization drafted in the next 4 minutes. Emergency recall, full liability coverage. He looked back at Sarah. You fly under emergency recall. That puts you back in uniform for the duration. It also means you follow orders. Sarah looked at him steadily. I understand. He held her gaze for 2 seconds, then prepped the Raptor. The room heard it and moved. She was in the gear room 2 minutes later, pulling a flight suit from the emergency locker with the automatic efficiency of someone whose hands remembered the sequence without requiring instruction from the brain. Airman Wyatt Fossey appeared in the doorway holding a helmet. He was working hard to maintain his composure and only partially succeeding. She took the helmet. The HUD will show you the contact in real time, he said. I have set up the data link so I can push updates directly to your display. If the contact changes behavior, I will flag it. Good, she said. I have also, he stopped, started again. I have never done a real-time combat relay before. I have done it in training. 40-some exercises. She looked at him. Then you know how to do it. Do not overthink it. He nodded. She was already moving. The Raptor was waiting on the flight line with ground crew at their positions and the engines beginning their startup sequence. Sarah walked toward it and the desert air hit her face, the heat still significant even in the late afternoon. The smell of jet exhaust and hot tarmac reaching her in a wave so familiar it almost stopped her breathing. Almost. Cadet Owen Rafferty was standing at the edge of the operations building. He had come out when the alarm sounded, drawn by the instinct that pulls certain people toward the center of things. He was watching her with an expression she could not immediately name. She did not stop, but she glanced at him as she passed. He said nothing. His eyes followed her with the focus of someone who is watching something they will spend a long time remembering. Master Sergeant Dobbins, 9 years at this base and a reputation for not wasting words, met her at the ladder. She is ready. Hydraulics, good. Fuel full. Weapons, hot. He looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating something he thought he had figured out. You need anything? Keep the runway clear, she said. She climbed the ladder, the cockpit enclosed around her. This was the moment she had imagined and feared and refused to think about for 5 years. The sealed world of the cockpit, the instrument array coming to life around her, the hum of the systems building beneath her, the harness pulling across her chest with its familiar pressure. She had expected it to feel wrong or painful. She had expected the weight of what she was returning to. It felt like coming inside after standing in a storm. She ran the checks. Her hands moved through the sequence without hesitation, without reference to any checklist. The muscle memory intact, perfectly preserved 5 years in amber. Every switch, every confirmation, every system status, her hands knew where to go and her eyes knew what to look for, and the two worked together with the synchronization of something that had never actually stopped. The engine spooled up. The sound and vibration moved through her bones. Ghost 6, Tanner's voice in her headset. Calm, steady, the voice of someone calling a name they have been saving. Systems confirmed. You are clear for immediate departure. She looked at the radar contact on her HUD, moving, getting closer to the corridor. Copy, she said. She released the brake. The Raptor moved forward, and the desert opened ahead, and the sky above was the pale gold the Texas morning had promised. And Sarah Voss pushed the throttle forward and felt the aircraft answer with everything it had, and the ground fell away beneath her. And after 5 years of silence, Ghost 6 was airborne. Below on the flight line, Cadet Owen Rafferty watched the F-22 climb until it became a shape against the sky, then a dot, then nothing. He stood there for a while after it was gone. In the command center, Wyatt Fossey watched the radar display and saw two contacts now, the unidentified drone and the new signature of the Raptor climbing to intercept. Gil Tanner stood at the back of the room with his arms folded, watching the screen, his face carrying the expression of a man who has been holding something heavy for a long time and has just set it down. And on that radar screen, Ghost 6 flew west into the Texas afternoon towards something that, as Tanner already suspected and Sarah did not yet know, had been built from her own reflection. She found it at 41,000 feet. The radar had been tracking it for 9 minutes by the time she climbed into intercept range, and she had been studying its movement on her HUD the whole way up, watching its behavior with the focused attention of someone reading a text in a language they almost know. There was a quality to its flight path she could not immediately name. Something in the way it used the sky, not random, not programmed in any pattern she recognized from standard UAV doctrine. Something that sat between those two categories in a way that had no clean label. She got visual at 2 miles. Angular and black, and smaller than she had expected, roughly the size of a large recreational aircraft, but without any of the softness that implies. Every surface was a deliberate geometric decision. Swept wings at an aggressive angle. No markings, no lighting. It caught the late afternoon sun in fragments, briefly bright and then dark again as it moved. She moved to close the distance. The drone changed course. A small adjustment. 11 degrees left altitude drop of 400 feet executed in the time it takes to blink. Clean and immediate, as if it had known she was coming and had simply been waiting for her to arrive before deciding what to do about it. She adjusted to match. The drone adjusted again. She pulled right to cut the angle. The drone moved left. She climbed to gain altitude advantage. The drone was already climbing, not matching her rate exactly, but moving in a way that negated what she was trying to build. She tried 3 more approaches, standard intercept geometry, every time the drone was somewhere else. She pulled back to distance and flew parallel to the contact watching it. Fossey, she said, go ahead. This contact is not flying a reactive defensive pattern. Reactive means it sees me and moves away. That is default UAV programming. This is different. It is not moving away from where I am. It is moving away from where I am going to be. She paused. It is predicting me, not tracking me. There is a difference. Where is? Silence on the line. She heard his fingers on his keyboard. Ghost 6 say again. It is reading my intentions, she said, not my position. A longer silence, then stand by. I am pulling the drone's technical profile. In the command center, the room had taken on the quality of quiet that descends when people who manage crises encounter something outside their preparation. Colonel Hartwell stood with his hands behind his back, watching the radar display. 2 contacts, one moving steadily, one moving in a way that was genuinely difficult to categorize. Wyatt Fossey worked his console with the focused intensity of someone who is afraid and has decided precision is the best response to fear. He was pulling data cross-referencing the drone's technical signature against every database he could reach, which was more databases than most people in the building knew he could access. Gil Tanner stood at the back of the room and said nothing. He had said very little since Sarah launched. He had watched the radar and watched the room and watched Hartwell's jaw work with contained urgency. He was waiting. He had been waiting since the moment he recognized the drone's approach vector on the screen 30 minutes ago, since the moment he understood what it traced. He had a theory that had arrived complete and cold in the first 30 seconds of looking at that line, and he had been sitting with it since turning it over, checking it against everything he knew, finding no errors in it. He thought about the audit memo on his desk. He thought about the records it would review. He thought about who had the most to lose when those records were reviewed. Fossey stopped typing. He sat back in his chair in the particular way someone sits back when what they have found is not what they were prepared to find. Hartwell noticed. Fossey. Sir, Fossey kept his voice careful. I have a partial decode on the drone's operational profile. It is running adaptive combat AI, custom built, not off the shelf. The architecture of the learning module. He stopped, started again. The training data for the adaptive module is individual flight telemetry, combat telemetry, thousands of hours, all from a single source. Whose telemetry? Hartwell said. Fossey found Tanner's eyes across the room. Something passed between them. Tanner answered before Fossey could. His voice was even. The voice of a man delivering a briefing he has been hoping never to give. Ghost 6, he said. The room processed this. Hartwell looked at the radar display. Ghost 6's blip was moving hard, working a geometry that from this angle looked almost like controlled falling. He looked back at Tanner. How did someone get classified combat telemetry for a pilot whose records were officially purged? Because officially purged is not the same as gone, Tanner said. The records were removed from the standard registry. They were not destroyed. Someone with access to the archive where they were held had access to everything in them. He paused. And I believe I know who, but I need 10 minutes and a secondary channel to confirm it. Hartwell looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, and Tanner took his phone to the far corner of the room. Sarah ran another intercept approach. This time she varied her energy bleed, changed her closure rate, introduced a rhythm to her movements that did not match any standard pattern. Variation drawn from feel rather than doctrine. The drone adjusted anyway. Smaller than the last adjustment, a fraction less precise, as if her variation had cost it something at the margins. But it adjusted. It maintained its position relative to her at almost exactly the distance it preferred. She pulled away again. She understood the problem now with the clarity that comes when something you have been circling finally comes into full view. The drone had been trained on what she did. Every technique she had ever developed. Every instinct she had ever acted on in the sky. Every choice she had made under pressure translated into data fed into an algorithm designed to see her coming before she arrived. The only way to defeat it was to stop being herself. The problem was she did not know how to be anyone else. She thought about Damon, not deliberately, the kind of thinking that surfaces when the conscious mind is occupied with other things and what lies beneath begins to move. Damon Mercer had been the kind of pilot who thought about thinking, who analyzed not just what he did in the cockpit, but why and whether the why was sound. He had told her once somewhere over a stretch of desert he was not permitted to name that the most dangerous opponents he had ever faced were the ones who had studied him, who arrived in the fight already knowing what he was likely to do. He had said the only answer was to stop being predictable, which sounds simple until you understand what it costs. Every technique you have built, every instinct you have trained, every reflex that has kept you alive in 100 emergencies, you set all of it aside and fly from a place that is not built on anything. Pure improvisation, from the part of yourself that exists before the training starts. He had called it flying from scratch. He said he had managed it twice in his career. She put her hand on the throttle and thought about what it felt like to have no habits. Fossey, she said, go ahead. How deep does the training data go? Still decoding, but it looks like it covers your full combat period, 7 years of records. How many hours? His voice tightened. Approximately 2,400 hours of individual flight telemetry. She held this, 2,400 hours. Everything she had ever done in a cockpit from her first combat assignment forward encoded into the machine she was trying to outmaneuver. Her exact reaction times, her throttle management under stress, her tendency to climb before a hard maneuver because she had learned early that altitude was the one resource you could spend but never earn back in a hurry. The drone knew that tendency. It was using it against her. Fossey, she said, stop giving me updates on the drone's movement. A pause. Say again. No call-outs unless I ask for them. Maintain the data relay. Keep the channel clear. Another pause. Copy. Then in a different register, you have this. She did not respond to that, but she held it. She went at the drone differently. Everything she did in the next 4 minutes was wrong by her own standards, not drawn from any techniques she had built over a career, not recognizable as Ghost 6 from the outside or from the inside. She flew from a place without habit, without reflex, without the accumulated weight of everything she knew. It was the hardest thing she had ever done in an aircraft, because every instinct she had was trained. Every reflex was shaped by years of repetition under pressure. Removing all of that and operating from the raw material underneath was like trying to walk without using the muscles you normally use for walking theoretically possible, practically disorienting in a way that pushed against every defense the body has. But the drone began to hesitate. Not much. Small gaps, fractions of a second between her moves and its responses. It had been trained on what she did, and she had stopped doing what she did, and the AI at its core was running probability calculations on inputs that did not match the profile it had been given. Not confused exactly, recalculating. And recalculation took time. She gave it things to recalculate. She bled energy in ways that made no tactical sense and recovered in ways that also made no tactical sense. And from the outside, it would have looked like a pilot under extreme stress, making erratic decisions. From the inside, it was the most deliberate sequence of choices she had made in the sky. She was not winning yet, but she had stopped losing in the way she had been losing. Then Fosse's voice came through, tight abandoning the silence she had asked for. Ghost 6, new information. I need you to hear this. She was in the middle of a maneuver. She held it completed. It pulled back to neutral distance. Go ahead. The metadata in the drone's learning module, he said. There is more than flight telemetry. There is biometric data, physiological baseline, and it is dated. He stopped. Fosse, the flight records for Ghost 6 officially ended in 2019, he said, and his voice was working hard to stay level. But the biometric baseline in this system was updated 18 months ago. That means someone had access to a living person 18 months ago. The identifier on the biometric data, she said, whose name is on it? The pause that followed was long enough that she had the answer before he spoke it. D. Mercer, Fosse said. She did not say anything. She was flying at 430 knots at 40,000 feet over West Texas, and the drone was ahead of her, and the quarter was below and ahead, and everything she had held as true for 5 years was restructuring itself into something with different dimensions. Damon Mercer had been declared killed in action in a classified operation in 2019. She had been told this by people she trusted. She had been given no body, no physical evidence, no ceremony. She had been told what happened and instructed to accept it, which she had done in the only way she could carry his dog tag, and refused to talk about it and drive herself into invisibility on a base in West Texas. But his biometric data had been updated 18 months ago, which meant 18 months ago Damon Mercer was alive, which meant someone had access to him, which meant he was somewhere, which meant 5 years of carefully carried weight had been built on a story that was not the whole story. The drone pulled a hard right brake. She reacted not from training, from something older, from the place below the skill, below the technique, below everything she had built and rebuilt. She went with it before she had decided to. Ghost 6, Tanner's voice. Measured. I need you to keep flying. Can you do that? Not a question. Yes, she said. Good, he said. There is a conversation waiting for you on the ground, but you need to get there first. She understood what he was telling her. He was telling her there was more. He was telling her to stay in the aircraft and finish what she had started. She thought about Damon's voice, the last time she had heard it over a radio cutting out. She had replayed it so many times in memory that she could no longer be certain she was remembering the moment or remembering her memory of it. She put her hand on the throttle. She was not going to let this drone reach those people. She pressed the throttle forward, and the Raptor answered clean and immediate, and the sky ahead was wide, and the drone was ahead in it, and Sarah Voss began the sequence that would end this. One way or another, inside the command center, another problem arrived quietly. Fosse, still working his console, picked up a secondary signal embedded in the drone's operating frequency. Not the AI control signal, not automated. A real-time communication channel, active two-way current. Someone was communicating with the drone as it flew, making course corrections in real time, responding to Ghost 6's movements through a human operator rather than leaving it entirely to the algorithm. The signal frequency was domestic, military band. Fosse looked at this result for a moment. Then he sent it to Tanner rather than announcing it to the room. Tanner, in the far corner, finishing his third call, read the message on his phone. He closed the call he was on. He sat still for a moment with his phone in his hand. Then he stood and walked to Hartwell. At 41,000 feet, Sarah tore through an approach she had been building toward for several minutes without entirely knowing it, the way solutions sometimes assemble themselves below the level of conscious planning and surface only when they are ready. She had been establishing a behavioral rhythm, not a fighting pattern, a rhythm in how she approached and withdrew. Approached and withdrew that had no tactical purpose except consistency. She had been giving the drone something to predict. Now she broke the pattern completely. She went wide further than any previous pass, dropped altitude aggressively, and pointed the Raptor directly at the sun, which sat at 15 degrees above the western horizon, and threw a hard flat light that her visor managed, and the drone's optical sensors would not manage as cleanly. She drove straight at it, full throttle. The drone tracked her, but tracking into direct solar glare cost sensor accuracy, and the AI was already working to compensate for the approaches that did not match its profile, and for 4 seconds, she had a quality of near invisibility. She rolled inverted. At the top of the arc, upside down, ground above and sky below, she pulled through hard and came out pointing in a direction that put the drone's primary sensor field facing away from her and the sun behind her. She was behind it. Below its sensors, lined up on the structural point she had been studying all afternoon, she did not fire. The geometry was almost right, but not completely right, and she had a rule about firing ordnance when populated ground was below. Not a rule she had been given, a rule she had made for herself in a specific moment on a specific day that she did not approach directly in her memory. She pressed it instead. The drone broke left, and she followed, and the running engagement carried them both northwest, away from the 385, away from the towns, strung along it into the emptier sky above the desert, where the only things below were scrub and rock and dry riverbeds that had not held water in years. And it was there, with the drone running and losing increments, that she tore open the radio channel, and Fosse was already talking. "Go 6, I have a second signal. Someone is controlling this drone in real time. The frequency is domestic. Military band. This is not a foreign asset." She had known this since the approach vector on the screen in the command center. She had known it and set it aside because the knowing did not change the physics. But hearing it said aloud with a frequency attached to it changed something about the weight of it. She closed the throttle slightly, pulled away from the drone. It moved to maintain distance, and in that movement she saw the confirmation of what Fosse had said, the small variations in its adjustment that were human-paced, not algorithm-paced. Someone was watching, someone was guiding it. Someone on the ground in this country had built a weapon from the record of her entire flying life and sent it up here. She had one problem. It required everything she had. She pressed the toggle that took her off the main channel. For a moment, the radio was silent. Just the engines and the sky in the distance, still between her and the runway. She was alone. At 41,000 feet, alone in a cockpit, the silence of a closed radio channel is its own particular kind of quiet. The engines are always there, the constant presence beneath and behind. But the voices from the ground stop. The tactical chatter stops. What remains is you and the aircraft in the sky. Sarah reached into her chest pocket. She did this carefully, keeping her right hand on the stick, using her left to draw out the dog tag. She did not look at it immediately. She kept her eyes on the HUD, on the drone's position on the horizon. She set the dog tag on the edge of her instrument panel against the base of the HUD display, where she could see it without looking directly at it. D. Mercer, she had carried this tag for 5 years, the way some people carry a photograph or a letter. The way you carry the physical object that represents the thing you cannot hold on to any other way. She had not been able to determine in 5 years whether carrying it was a comfort or a wound. She suspected it was both, which was perhaps why she kept doing it. She looked at it. "Damon," she said, not the radio voice, the one underneath it, the one she had been carrying longer than the call sign. "I do not know if you are still out there," she said. "I have been telling myself for 5 years that you were not, that what they told me about the mission was true and you were gone, and I had to figure out how to be someone who operates without the person they flew beside for 7 years. She paused. The engines held their note beneath her. "I did not do a very good job of it," she said, "in case you were wondering." The drone maintained its course ahead of her, patient, waiting. "This thing they sent up here," she said, "it is built from every mic I know. Every move I have ever made. Someone gave it my whole life in numbers, and it thinks that makes it me." She looked at the tag. "You used to say the numbers are not the pilot. Remember, you said it to the younger ones who got obsessed with their performance metrics. The numbers are what the pilot left behind. The pilot is what happens next." She reached out and picked up the dog tag, held it in her left hand for a moment. "I'm going to do what you would have told me to do," she said. "I'm going to stop flying like myself." She put the dog tag back in her pocket. She opened the radio channel. "Fosse, new approach. Stop narrating the drone's movement unless I ask for it. Keep the channel clear." "Copy," he said. Then quietly, "You have this." She did not respond, but she held it. She went at the drone from a place without history, the hardest thing she had ever done in an aircraft. Not because it required a skill she did not have, but because it required the suspension of every skill she had spent 17 years building, flying from the raw material underneath all of it, from pure improvisation, pure instinct that existed before training shaped it into something specific and recognizable. The drone began to lose fractions of seconds. Its recalculations were costing it. The profile it had been built to anticipate kept failing to appear, and every time the situation did not match the expected input, the AI had to search through its probability space for a new answer, and that search had a duration however brief, and brief durations accumulated. She was inside those accumulations. She was not winning, working toward winning. In the air, you know the difference before you can describe it. Then Fosse's voice came back. He had found something in the drone's metadata, something deeper than the flight telemetry. And in the minute that followed, as she held the aircraft steady and absorbed what he was telling her, everything she had been carrying for 5 years shifted its weight and sat differently on her chest. Biometric data, 18 months ago. D. Mercer, not dead, somewhere, alive at least until 18 months ago, which meant possibly alive now. She put the information on a shelf in her mind, acknowledged it, knew where it was, would come back to it. But right now she was doing something else. Right now she was finishing this. She drove the drone northwest away from every populated area, and she pressed it with everything that existed below her training, and the drone resisted with diminishing precision. And she found the angle she had been building toward since the beginning of the engagement, and she lined it up on the structural point she had identified in the first 10 minutes of the fight, and she armed the cannon, and she flew the next 30 seconds. She fired. The rounds went into the drone's left wing assembly at the structural nexus where the wing met the body, the point she had been studying all afternoon, and she had the angle and the closure rate and the window that she had built through everything she had done since she rolled off the runway an hour ago. The drone came apart, not immediately and not cleanly. First, the structural failure at the wing root, the left wing departing from the body in a way that turned the remaining airframe into an asymmetric projectile, and then the fuel system, and then the ordnance and the sequence completed itself in a fireball that expanded quickly and then dissipated in the thin air at altitude into a spreading cloud of smoke and debris that caught the low sun and was briefly almost beautiful. She was already banking away from the shockwave. She almost made it clear. The pressure front hit the Raptor on the left quarter hard, and she felt it in the airframe before she saw it in the instruments. The aircraft yawed violently, left the control surfaces fighting to correct, and then the left engine alarm stopped being amber. It went red. She held the Raptor through the yaw with both hands and both feet on the pedals. Pure physical flying instruments, almost secondary, because the information she needed was in her hands and in the sound and in the vibration pattern that changed immediately when the left engine's oil pressure dropped through the floor and the engine began its shutdown sequence. Ghost 6, Fosse's voice. Hi. You are showing left engine failure. Eject now. She did not eject. She was already running the single-engine emergency checklist in the part of her mind that ran checklists while the rest of her flew the aircraft. The Raptor was asymmetric, now power on the right, dead on the left, and asymmetric flight in an F-22 had specific solutions, and she knew every one of them and was applying them in sequence, while the aircraft announced its situation in multiple languages simultaneously. I have the aircraft, she said on the radio, which was what you said to the people on the ground who were going to tell you to do something she was not going to do. Ghost 6 left engine is gone, eject. Hartwell this time displacing Fosse. I have the aircraft, she said again. Sarah. Tanner, her name, not her call sign. She noticed this. What is your plan? Single engine return to base, straight in approach, clear the runway and have equipment standing by. The hydraulics are compromised, he said. Fosse is reading reduced braking authority. I know. Then you know what the landing looks like. Yes, she said, a pause. How far, he said. 61 miles, Fosse said. She did the math. She could make 61 miles on one engine in these conditions. The variables were the hydraulics and the braking, and the fact that a compromised hydraulic system on landing was not a small variable. She had landed compromised aircraft before. Not this compromised. She set the Raptor on course for the base, and she flew. She drove it west, not toward the corridor, not toward the 385 and the town strung along it. West into emptier sky above terrain that held nothing below worth protecting. The drone resisted the redirection with a specificity that told her it had somewhere it was trying to be. She pushed it anyway. She was not flying clean anymore. The approach she was using had no name in any manual because it was not the product of a system or a doctrine. It was the product of this particular afternoon, this particular aircraft, this particular opponent. She was finding the gaps in its prediction by removing everything it could predict. It was like performing surgery on her own instincts while using those instincts to hold the scalpel. But it was working. She set up a high-angle cut from the north dropping altitude, fast to come in below and behind the drone's primary sensor field, and the drone adjusted but not fast enough, and she got a partial targeting solution that she pressed into a full lock over the span of 2 seconds. She fired. The missile left the rail cleanly and tracked true, and the geometry was right, and for a moment it looked like an ending. The drone released countermeasures. A layered sequence pattern designed to split the missile's tracking between multiple heat signatures. She had seen this pattern before. She had designed a version of it herself during a training exercise 5 years ago and had written it up as a recommendation to the Flight Tactics Working Group. Apparently someone had read that document. The missile followed the wrong signature. It detonated 40 meters behind the drone in a burst that shook the Raptor in its wake and sent the drone into a compensating pitch that was for about 3 seconds ungainly. The left wing dipped. The flight path wavered. She was already inside that waver. She came in from the left cannon, hot, and put a burst through the drone's left wing assembly at the structural hinge point she had identified during the previous passes. The rounds hit. The drone's left side took damage, not catastrophic, not a kill, but real, structural. The kind of damage that changed what a machine could do and how much it cost to do it. She pulled away to distance and held. Ghost 6, you hit it. Tracking shows reduced maneuverability in the left control surface. I know, it is not down. No. She looked at the drone on her HUD, damaged and still moving, but now moving northwest away from the 385, away from the towns, away from the base. She had pushed it far enough that it was no longer aimed at its original target, but her Raptor was beginning to tell her things she did not want to hear. The hydraulic pressure caution had been amber since the drone's countermeasure detonation. Now the left engine was showing early oil pressure degradation. Not critical, trending toward critical. She had seen this signature before. Fossey, she said, left engine is showing early oil pressure degradation. You should know that. Well, Hartwell's voice came on immediately. Ghost 6, assess your aircraft. Can you disengage? No, she said. That was not a suggestion. I know what it was not. The contact is damaged but not neutralized. If I disengage, it reorients toward the corridor. I need 2 more minutes. A silence long enough to hear the calculation happening. 2 minutes, Hartwell said. She was already moving. In the command center, Tanner had finished his 3rd call. What he had was not proof in any legal sense. It was the architecture of a decision clearly visible once you had enough separate data points to see the pattern they formed. A pattern made by someone with the authority to make the decisions involved and the institutional cover to survive, having made them right up until the moment that cover ran out. He walked to Hartwell. Sir, he said quietly, I need to show you something. He held out his phone. On the screen was a communication record. Time-stamped, frequency logged. A military communication channel accessed in the last 40 minutes from a location on this base, not the command center. An administrative wing, 2 buildings over. An office belonging to someone who was scheduled to be at a conference in San Antonio and was therefore not supposed to be on base at all. Hartwell looked at the record. He looked at the name attached to the office. He said the name very quietly. Tanner said, yes, sir. Hartwell looked at the radar display. Ghost 6's blip was still moving, working a geometry that was difficult to follow even with training. He looked at the communication record again. Brigadier General Victor Hale, 57 years old, 30 years in the Air Force. The man who had signed the authorization for the Black Operations program that produced Ghost 6's combat record. The man who subsequently signed the order dissolving that program. The man who signed the paperwork officially erasing the names associated with it from the public record, including Damon Mercer's. Hale had not erased those records because they were liabilities to national security, which was the reason given in the authorization he signed. He had erased them because one of his decisions, a specific tactical decision made under time pressure in 2019, had resulted in a pilot being left in the field, captured, held. The kind of outcome that ends careers and occasionally ends freedom when the right people look at the right documents in the right sequence. He had spent 5 years ensuring no one looked. The audit memo that had been sitting on Tanner's desk for 6 weeks, the review that would begin Monday morning, was the deadline he had been working against. He had read that memo and understood that the window for managing this problem was closing. The drone was his solution. Not a weapon aimed at a town, a weapon aimed at a specific structure on this base, the records building, where the classified program archives from 2017 through 2021 were held pending the Monday audit. Precision demolition. The towns along the 385 were never the target. They were the story that would be told afterward, the cover that makes a crime look like something else entirely. Tanner had understood this for 30 minutes. He had spent those 30 minutes confirming it rather than stating it, because stating it without confirmation would have achieved nothing except premature alarm. He had confirmation now. Hartwell called two names across the room, gave an instruction. Two officers left through the side door at a pace that was controlled and fast. Hartwell looked at the radar display once more. Ghost 6's blip was pressing hard, the engagement moving northwest away from the corridor, away from the base. He straightened and followed the officers out. The sun was getting low. Sarah registered this peripherally. The angle of light was changing, which changed the behavior of heat signatures, which changed the reliability of the drone's optical sensors relative to its radar. In another 20 minutes, the sun would be at an exploitable angle. She did not have 20 minutes. But the information was filed regardless, because a pilot who stops gathering information is a pilot who stops knowing what their options are. She pressed the drone again. It was slower now. She could feel it in the geometry. It was working harder to maintain positioning the compromised left control surface, forcing constant compensation and constant compensation cost processing power that comes from somewhere. She set up the approach she had been building toward for several minutes without entirely knowing it, the way solutions sometimes assemble themselves below conscious planning and surface only when complete. She had been establishing a behavioral rhythm with no tactical purpose except consistency. She had been giving it something to predict. Now she broke the pattern. She went wide further than any previous pass dropped altitude, aggressively pointed the Raptor directly at the sun. It sat at 15 degrees above the western horizon, throwing a hard, flat light that her visor managed and the drone's sensors would not manage as cleanly. She drove straight at it, full throttle. The engine note rose. The drone tracked her, but tracking into direct solar glare cost accuracy, and for 4 seconds she had what was close enough to invisibility. She rolled inverted. At the top of the arc, upside down ground above, and sky below, she pulled through hard and came out pointing in a direction that put the drone's damaged left side directly ahead and the sun behind her. She was behind it, below its primary sensors, lined up. She thought of Damon, his voice exact the way some things stay exact because you have held them carefully enough and long enough. When you are out of options, he had said, make the situation smaller. Reduce the whole problem to the one thing you can do right now. One thing, the next thing. Do not fly the whole mission. Fly the next 30 seconds. She flew the next 30 seconds. She fired. The cannon rounds went into the drone's fuselage at the structural nexus she had been studying all afternoon, the point where the left wing assembly met the main body. She had the angle and the closure rate and the light in the window she had built through everything she had done since she rolled off the runway an hour ago. The drone came apart, not immediately and not cleanly. First, the structural failure at the wing root, the left wing departing from the body in a way that turned the remaining airframe into an asymmetric projectile, and then the fuel system, and then the ordnance, and the sequence completed itself in a fireball that expanded quickly and then dissipated in the thin air at altitude into a spreading cloud of smoke and debris that caught the low sun and was briefly almost beautiful. She was already banking away from the shockwave. The pressure front hit the Raptor on the left quarter, and it hit hard, and she felt it in the airframe before she saw it in the instruments. The aircraft yawed violently left. The control surfaces fought to correct. Then the left engine alarm stopped being amber and went red. She held the Raptor through the yaw with both hands and both feet on the pedals. Pure physical flying instruments, almost secondary because the information she needed was in her hands and in the vibration pattern that changed immediately when the engine began its shutdown sequence. Go 6, left engine failure. Eject now. She did not eject. She ran the single engine emergency checklist in the part of her mind that ran checklists, while the rest of her flew the aircraft. The Raptor was asymmetric power on the right, dead on the left, and the solutions were specific, and she was applying them in sequence. I have the aircraft, she said. Sarah, Tanner, her name. What is your plan? Single engine return to base, straight in approach. Clear the runway. The hydraulics are compromised, reduced braking authority. I know. Then you know what the landing looks like. Yes, she said. How far? 61 miles, Fossey said. She set the Raptor on course for the base and she flew. The Texas desert spread below her in the late afternoon light, red and gold and brown, the vast flat patience of old land that has seen everything and is not impressed by any of it. She flew over it, steadily managing the asymmetric configuration, coaxing the wounded aircraft through the sky by feel as much as by instrument. The hydraulic pressure caution was amber and staying there for now. The left engine was gone, but the right was solid. She had 61 miles, then the signal appeared. Fosse noticed it first. She heard the change in his voice before he spoke, a tightening, a shift in register that she had learned to read over the past hour and a half. Ghost 6, I am reading a signal. Low power, short range. It is not a standard format, and it is not coming from the base. It is not on any registered frequency in this region. A pause in which she could hear him working. It is modulated like a personal communication signal. Old format, pre-2015. Another pause. I am patching it to your headset. She almost told him not to. She had one problem, and it required everything she had. But she did not tell him not to. The signal came through as static first. The particular texture of a weak signal fighting its distance the way shortwave radio sounds through bad atmospheric conditions. Then beneath the static, something that organized itself gradually into something that was not random. A voice? Male. Low. The particular quality of vocal cords that had not spoken much recently. Rough at the edges. Effortful. The voice of someone operating at the limit of what they had available. It came in 3 pieces, each one separated by a breath of static that threatened to close over it entirely. Ghost 6, a pause, long enough that she thought that was all. I hear you. Another pause. She held the aircraft absolutely level, did not move, did not breathe in any way that might disturb the reception. Come home. Then the static closed. Complete. Final. The channel returned to the neutral white noise of empty frequency, and she was alone again in the cockpit with the engines and the instruments and 53 miles still between her and the runway. She flew. She did not look at the instrument panel immediately. She did not reach into her chest pocket. She did not do anything except fly steadily, precisely, without any wasted movement, the way she had flown for 17 years when the thing she was flying toward mattered enough. She thought about what she had heard and whether she was certain. She was completely certain, the way you are completely certain about very few things. The specific texture of a voice, the particular rhythm of how it moved through words, the quality that belongs to one person, and no approximation of that person, these things do not sound like other things. She had heard that voice in a cockpit at altitude more times than she could count, and she had heard it just now, and there was no version of what she had heard that was something else. Damon Mercer was alive, and he was transmitting from somewhere he could hear her, which meant he had been listening, which meant he had been tracking her engagement, which meant he had access to something, equipment, a location, something that gave him that capability. She put all of it on the shelf. She would come back to it. Right now, she was doing something else. Right now, she was bringing this aircraft home. The base appeared ahead at the limits of the evening visibility, a geometric pattern of lights and structures against the darkening floor of the desert. The runway lights were on, full emergency lighting. She could see fire equipment positioned along the edges, the amber of emergency vehicles, the cleared expanse of the main runway. Rafferty had done that, she found out later. Owen Rafferty, 23 years old, who had been standing at the edge of the operations building when she launched and who had spent the past hour watching the radar in the command center over the shoulders of people who outranked him significantly, had been the one who went to the flight line and coordinated with Master Sergeant Dobbins to position the emergency equipment. Nobody asked him to. He assessed what was needed and did it. She would think about that later. Right now, she had an instrument approach with one engine and reduced hydraulic authority and braking. That was going to be an approximation of braking at best. She needed to thread a needle on a landing that had a wide margin for error at the front end and a very narrow margin at the back end. Go 6. Fosse's voice steady now, with the steadiness that comes from having passed through the worst of what you were afraid of and arrived at a focused calm on the other side. You are showing on final. Wind is negligible. Runway is clear all the way. Copy. Braking teams are at midfield and far end. Dobbins says he has you. She thought of Dobbins at the ladder telling her the aircraft was ready. Tell him I have him too, she said. She dropped the gear. The landing gear came down with the mechanical groan she had expected, and the indicator lights went to 3 green, which was one of the more reassuring things that had happened in the last 90 minutes. The fly-by-wire was managing the asymmetric configuration better than she had had reason to hope. She was working with it rather than against it, and that cooperation had a value she did not try to calculate, but simply accepted as something to be grateful for. She took the dog tag from her chest pocket one more time. She did not look at it. She set it on the instrument panel in the same position she had used during the valley against the base of the HUD display where she could see it without looking directly. A presence. An anchor. She left it there. She crossed the runway threshold at 600 feet, fast. She was carrying more airspeed than a standard approach, because the reduced braking authority meant she needed initial speed higher to maintain control authority through the flare, and the calculation she was running was the one where you accept a hard landing to give yourself the longest possible deceleration run. She had done this before in aircraft in better shape than this one. The runway came up. She let the Raptor settle. The wheels hit at a rate that produced a sound and a physical jolt she felt in her spine and her teeth, and her hands simultaneously, the aircraft announcing its displeasure at the conditions of its return. The nose came down. She was on the brakes immediately, what brakes she had, and the deceleration was not what a normal landing produces, but it was real and it was building, and she held the center line against the yaw that the dead left engine was pulling right rudder and right brake, differential, and everything she had in her hands. She felt the tail hook catch the emergency wire at midfield, felt it in her whole body. The Raptor stopped. She sat in the cockpit for a moment in the sudden silence of engines that were no longer running and a flight that was no longer happening. The instrument panel in front of her was a display of amber and red warnings, the aircraft having a great deal to say about everything that had been done to it in the last hour and 40 minutes. She looked at the warnings without urgency. She had time now. She looked at the Bosch tag on the instrument panel. She picked it up, held it in her palm for a moment, looked at the engraving. D. Mercer. She put it back in her pocket. She pressed the canopy release. The Texas evening came in heat, becoming something softer, the particular quality of desert air, after a day at maximum temperature, beginning its long overnight release. The smell of the scrub and the tarmac, and somewhere in it, the faint metallic edge of fire suppressant pre-deployed along the runway edge. The sounds of the base reassembling around her. She unstrapped. She climbed out of the cockpit and down the ladder and stepped onto the runway and stood there just standing the way she had stood in the early morning under the wing of this same aircraft. Except it was not the early morning anymore. The sky above was going deep blue at the zenith and deep orange at the edges, and the aircraft behind her was smoking from the dead left engine in a thin dark line against that orange. She put her hand on the fuselage. "You did good," she said, quietly. To the aircraft, she meant it. Master Sergeant Dobbins arrived first because he was positioned to be first, and because he would not have had it any other way. He looked at the aircraft, which looked like something that had been through a serious disagreement with the laws of physics, and then he looked at her. "She is going to need some work," he said. "I know," she said. "I am sorry about that." "Do not be," he said, and he meant it completely. The emergency vehicles were moving, and the crews were deploying around the aircraft in their practice patterns, and then Hartwell was there covering the ground from the operations building with the speed of a man who has been held at the edge of a building since the landing began. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked at the aircraft. He looked at her. "You told me you could land it," he said. "Yes. You were right. By a margin I would not like to calculate." "By enough," she said. He shook his head, and the gesture contained something that was not disapproval. "Insane," he said. "What you just did was completely insane. Insane gets results." The left side of his expression moved in the direction of something. Then he straightened. "Hale is in custody." She looked at him. "Victor Hale," he said. "He was in the administrative wing running a real-time communication channel to the drone's relay operator when we found him." He held her gaze. "It is early. We do not have the full picture yet. But Gil has been building toward this for some time, and what he has is enough to hold him." She did not say anything for a moment. She understood the broad shape of it. Someone with authority had used that authority to protect themselves from the consequences of something they had done and had used her in the process. Had used everything she was. Had used Damon. The specific architecture of it, the 2019 decision, the classified program dissolution, the records audit scheduled for Monday morning, she would learn in the days ahead. What she understood now was the shape. That was enough to hold for the moment. "Colonel," she said, "yes. The biometric data in the drone was updated 18 months ago. That means Damon Mercer was alive at least until 18 months ago. That means he is somewhere." Hartwell held her gaze for a long moment. "We do not know that definitively yet." "I know," she said. "I am not asking for a definitive answer. I am telling you what the data says." He nodded once. "There is more," said Tanner's voice, and she turned to find him standing behind her. He had the quality of someone who had been there long enough to have heard the conversation, which she knew was not accidental. Gil Tanner did not end up in places accidentally. He was holding a folded piece of paper. "Damon Cruz Mercer," he said, and caught himself. Old habit. Something in the way he said the correction told her the name Cruz had significance she did not yet know. "He was 36 when we lost him. He would be 41 now." He held out the paper. From the debris field, Fossey pulled a partial data recovery from the drone's onboard memory. Most of it was corrupted. She took the paper. She unfolded it, a printout of a coordinate string. Latitude and longitude specific enough to identify a location within a few hundred meters. Below the coordinates, a frequency. An old format. A format she recognized because she had used it a personal communication protocol from several years ago that had been replaced by newer systems but still functioned for those who knew it. A format that matched exactly the frequency of the signal she had received 45 minutes ago at 41,000 feet. The signal with Damon's voice in it. She looked at the coordinates. She committed them to memory. It took 3 seconds. She folded the paper. She did not look up immediately. She stood with it folded in her hand and looked at the runway illuminated now in the last of the evening light and the emergency lighting, together an orange and white combination that made the tarmac look like something from a photograph taken a long time ago. She thought about a voice in static, rough and low and effortful. She thought about the precise texture of it, the way it had organized itself out of noise with the quality of a specific frequency finding its channel. She thought about how many times she had heard that voice in a cockpit at altitude and how certain she was about what she had heard, completely certain. Owen Rafferty was standing at the edge of the tarmac where the flight line began. He had been there since the landing and had not moved closer because he had the instinct to understand when to give people space. He was watching her with an expression that was completely unguarded, the expression of someone young enough to still show what they feel before they have learned to manage it. He had watched this entire day from the ground, from the moment she walked past him to the ladder to the moment she climbed back down, and what he was carrying in his face was the unmediated residue of all of it. He said quietly, just loud enough to carry across the few meters between them, "Are you going to find him?" She looked at the folded paper in her hand. She thought about 5 years of a life built around absence. A dog tag in a chest pocket, and coffee before dawn, and a palm pressed against cold fuselage in the early morning light. About what it meant to be told something was over when it was not over. About what it cost and what it was worth, and whether those were the same number. She thought about what Tanner had said, that she had needed to choose this herself, that she had needed to stand under that aircraft on her own and make her own decision. That the only way it worked was if it was genuinely hers. She put the paper in her chest pocket, the same pocket where she kept the dog tag. She felt them both there, the paper and the metal, and she left her hand over the pocket for a moment. "That is not a question," she said. She looked at the horizon. The last of the sun was below it now, leaving only the residue of its color, a band of orange and deep rose above the flat line of the desert, and above that the first stars of the evening were becoming visible in the darkening blue, more of them appearing, in the way the desert sky adds stars gradually, and then all at once until you cannot remember it looking any different. She took her hand away from her pocket. She walked, not toward the operations building, not toward the command center. She walked to the end of the runway where the tarmac met the desert fence line, and she stood there with the coordinates already in her memory and the frequency already filed where she would not lose it, and she looked west at where the sun had been. Tanner did not follow her immediately. He gave her a minute. Then he walked to where she was standing and stood beside her without saying anything, the way of someone who has long practice at being present without demanding anything from the presence. The desert at night was beginning its own register, small sounds, wind across scrub, the cooling expansion of heated earth, releasing the day's stored warmth in the patient way of things that have been doing this for a very long time. After a while, he said quietly, "How is your shoulder?" She had pulled something in the final engagement. She had not mentioned it. "Fine," she said. He nodded. He looked at the horizon. "For what it is worth," he said, "what Hale built, the capability, the drone, the use of your records, it was never supposed to be turned this way. What he did was not what the program was built for." "I know what it was built for," she said, not sharply. "The way you say something that does not need further discussion." He was quiet for a moment. "Did you know," she said, "when you brought me here? Did you know it would come to this?" He thought about this in a way that suggested he was deciding not to be careful with his answer. "I knew something was wrong with how the program ended," he said. "I knew Damon's file had been altered. I did not know the rest of it. I brought you here because I thought if something like this came, you would be the right person to be here for it." She considered this. "You could have told me," she said. "I could have," he agreed. "Why didn't you?" "Because you needed to choose it," he said, "not be told into it." He was quiet for a moment. "You had to stand under that aircraft on your own. You had to make your own decision. That was the only way it worked." She thought about 6:13 in the morning, and her palm flat against cold metal, and the current that had moved through her chest. She did not argue with him. She looked at the stars appearing above the desert, more of them now, the sky adding them in the way it always did out here, gradually and then all at once, until the abundance was the only thing you could see. She reached into her chest pocket. She felt the dog tag and the paper together, the metal edge of one and the folded corner of the other. She left them where they were. In the command center, Wyatt Fossey was beginning his incident report. He already knew it would take him a long time to write correctly. Everything that had happened in it resisted reduction to standard language, and he was committed to not reducing it. He would get it right. He would keep a copy. He would take it out in the years ahead and find different things in it each time. On the flight line, Master Sergeant Dobbins was beginning his damage assessment of the Raptor, his clipboard and flashlight moving methodically across the aircraft's surfaces. He talked to it while he worked the way he talked to all of them, a running low commentary that nobody heard and that he saw no reason to stop. At the edge of the tarmac, Owen Rafferty was still standing where he had been when Sarah walked away. He looked at the darkness where she had gone and looked at the stars and thought about what he had witnessed today with the careful attention of someone who understands that some days are the ones against which you measure everything else. He thought about what she had said. That is not a question. He thought about what that meant, the kind of person it required, the kind of thing that had to have happened to that person, and the kind of thing that had to still be alive in them for a sentence like that to be the true and complete answer to what he had asked. He stood there for a while looking at the stars above the desert and thought about what he wanted to be. And somewhere west of the base, at a location that corresponded to a coordinate string printed on a folded piece of paper in a chest pocket on a frequency that was several years old but still functional, for those who knew it, a signal that had been brief and low-powered and effortful had gone quiet again. The way signals do when the operator is conserving what remains. The frequency was still open, still transmitting silence, waiting for the answer that was already on its way.